Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Morton. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the artist and studio manager here at Baltimore Clayworks, and we are thrilled that you have all joined us. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining from my office located on Piscataway and Susquehannock land, currently known as Baltimore, Maryland. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk given today by Clarissa Pezone. She was a Lormina Salter Fellow at Baltimore Clayworks from 2021 to 2022 and is currently a long-term resident. Clarissa was a recipient of the Mary E. Nyburg grant in 2023 and used the funds to help support her residency at Creta Rome in Italy. To view more of our virtual content, please visit baltimoreclayworks.org. I will now turn it over to Clarissa.
So as Rebecca said, this year I was granted the Mary E. Nyburg Fund for Artist Development, which I used to attend Creta Rome, which is a residency in the center of Rome. And so I'm really grateful to have received this award to attend this residency. It was a 4-week period that was filled with a lot of growth and a lot of exploration of the city and adaptation to a different culture that was really helpful for my growth in my studio practice as well as personally. So here is a picture of us at the closing exhibition. So me and the other 5 residents who were there as part of the program and some community members who are also attending. So as I said, Creta is in the city center, but it's actually 2 different locations. So there is a city center branch that has 3 residents at a time. And then there is a countryside setting for the residency as well that hosts 2 artists at a time, usually couples. So artist couples who go and lodge together in kind of a more isolated setting than the city center. And so we are placed in these different settings in Rome, and over the course of 4 weeks, we react to the things that we see and make work throughout the time period alongside exploring. Okay, there we go. So this was a picture of my space while I was at Creta. So it's a pretty simple setup. It's a table, an overhead lamp, and a shelf. And then you can actually see the kiln about 2 inches away from my table right there. So it was a little warm, but it was really everything that I needed while I was there. And there were 3 tables essentially that we were placed at. This was on the far side. And then from the vantage point of this photo were the other tables. And so I chose this particular one because on the top of the shelf, there was a sculpture by Doug Jack, who is a big clay hero of mine and who attended this residency quite a few years ago, and who actually I had heard from that it was a really amazing experience. So I felt as though his work looming on my shelf was a good omen. So I chose this space because of that. And so here's just another picture of the studio view. So the first piece that I started to work on in the first couple of days that I was there, and a view through the kiln room. If you walked down that pathway, you would enter the classroom where they hosted community classes, much like Clayworks does. And then the accommodations for the residency were pretty simple. They were in a location called Casa Santa Lucia Filippini, which was actually a convent that was converted into a hotel. So it was still fully run by nuns who lived there. And it was fairly Spartan. So it was just the twin bed and a bedside table, a desk, and a wardrobe, but it was really pretty perfectly accommodating for the time I was there. As you might expect, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in the room since there were plenty of things to walk to and plenty of things to do in the studio. So it was a nice retreat away from the busyness of the tourism and everything going on in the city. And there was air conditioning, which is kind of not as common there as it is here. So it was sometimes a really nice reprieve because it was about 107 there for a while that I was there, about 2 weeks of it. So we had to take breaks sometimes and get cool again. So at the end of the 4-week residency, it culminated in this group exhibition of the 5 artists who are taking part in the countryside or in the city center residency, having this show together, which was titled Face to Face. They had purposely put all figurative artists together for this residency period. And so the people I was working alongside were also working with the human figure. And so now I'm going to talk about some of the shows that I saw, as well as some of the art that I saw throughout the city that was reflected in the work that I ended up making while I was there, and kind of the ways that the things that I saw ended up providing growth in my studio practice. So one of the first shows that I saw in the time I was there was called Sempre Vivo at Palazzo Bonaparte. And Sempre Vivo translates loosely to ever alive or ever living or still alive. And it was a show of a ton of major hitters of contemporary hyper-realistic sculpture. And so it was just several rooms that were filled with these like incredibly lifelike sculptures. And so there were 2 sculptures in particular in this show that seeing them in the beginning of this residency, it really set the tone for me of what I was really interested in thinking about during the time I was there. So if you are unfamiliar with my work, just as a very quick aside, recently or in the past few years, I've been doing life scale human bodies. A lot of that, it is centered on self-portraiture and really focused on realism. And a theme that's been going on in my work in the past couple of years has also been self-reflection, relationship with self. When it's not a relationship to self, it might be a relationship to memory or to objects that hold emotional weight or importance, so generational importance. And so a lot of these scenes and installations that I've done, or singular figures, the relationships are not so much with other people as they are with things. So in this sculpture, it's holding a sculpture. So it's a little bit meta. But something that I really started to notice in this show, especially with this piece, which actually, when I saw it, I had a really emotional reaction to this, this is Mother and Child by Sam Jenks. And the thing that really hit me was just that everything that I was feeling really struck by so far up to the point that I saw the show and afterwards really had to do with love and connection, whether that's two humans in connection with one another, or whether it's a relationship to something else like an animal, which I'll talk about later in the slideshow. So throughout the show, there were a lot of isolated human figures, but I found that they did not have the same emotional input for me as seeing this sculpture of this older woman holding this newborn. Or the next sculpture by Marc Séjean of this couple holding each other in this really loving embrace. And so I started to just think about how much I was noticing these really loving, connected moments, and started to think about how I could bring that into my studio practice and my work, rather than making work that's more about self-reflection or the self or isolation. So kind of on the same theme of connection, something else that I really noticed in my time there were a lot of animal sculptures and animals as part of the mythology of people or the mythology of places. And so this is the she-wolf that is a signifier of the origin story of Rome. So in this image, she's nursing Romulus and Remus, who were the founders of the city. Rome is named after Romulus. And so the mythology around this story is that Romulus and Remus were sentenced to death at birth and cast into the Tiber River, where they washed ashore, still barely alive, at the foot of a fig tree, and was found by this wolf who nursed them back to health before they were found by a family of shepherds and raised as shepherds. And they went on later to found Rome, and Romulus was the first king of Rome after Remus was killed. And so I was thinking about the she-wolf and thinking about my own relationship with animals and my own kind of stories that I construct in my head about the effect of, for lack of a better word, the wilderness or nature, and the way that I construct my feelings of spirituality or my feelings of connection around that relationship with the world, with the natural world. And so I made this piece thinking about the she-wolf, but mostly thinking about the foxes that are in my neighborhood, and kind of the special moment that happens for me when I have one, stumble across my path or have a moment with one when it's in my presence. And so I made these foxes kind of as a protective entity around this figure. Another theme that I started to notice throughout my time there was the relationships between various saints and animals. And so I went to a show actually that was all about Saint Francis of Assisi and his relationship to the wild. So he was somebody who chose to live a very, I guess, I'll call it a simple life. So, casting away from comfort, and really he was a defender of animals. He's like mythologized as being very in relationship with the world, very in relationship with animals. And there's a famous sermon that he did that was Sermon to the Birds. And so he was documented as giving sermons to the birds. And a lot of the paintings and the representations of him in this show were of him doing that. And so I started to notice that relationship and felt really influenced by it. And I started to notice other relationships in other sculptures and paintings between saints and animals. So like Saint Roch, who was really, who has always partnered in sculptures with this dog who was attributed as saving his life. He like licked his sores when he had the plague, as well as I believe bringing him bread when he was starving. So it's kind of these like, these embodied animals that came as helpers to people in their time of need. And so I just started to notice these different relationships with different saints or different characteristics that were put to different animals in painting. So whether it's using animals as a representation of gentleness or childlikeness, being naive, or whether it's a symbol of strength or companionship or loyalty. I just started to notice these animals in the things that I was seeing around me. And then during the time that I was in Rome, I ended up taking a weekend while I was there and going up to London, which was a really exciting experience because all of the museums are free. And so I just walked around to absolutely as many museums as I possibly could in the time that I was there. And it was really great to recontextualize what I had been seeing in the museums in Rome through the lens of kind of a more holistic view of Europe. And the way that when the Roman Empire fell, that kind of influenced different cultures within Europe to move in different directions. And so going there was really important for that, but it was also really wonderful to see a lot of wonderful work, both from Italy and from all over. And one of the shows that I saw there that I was really excited to see was called Portraits of Dogs, Portraits of Us. And this was a more contemporary take on showing animals, particularly dogs, in art throughout history. And I think the show was based on the fact that the Queen has very famously has corgi dogs. And so there were images of her and her dogs. And then it just went into this greater, look at the ways that dogs are represented in art. And there were a lot of these paintings, a lot of sculptures, some taxidermy even. But the piece in it that really struck me was there was a room full of David Hockney paintings of his dachshunds. I think these are really just beautiful paintings, but it also just really struck me because of the story behind these paintings, which he had done like a ton of these paintings. And he did them because he had gotten these dogs during the AIDS crisis after he had lost a lot of, I think, 4 good friends, and he was grieving, and these dogs were such a source of joy to him that they ended up being the subject of his work for a period of time. And so I just thought that was really beautiful, and the it just showed the importance of connection and the way that animals just can kind of act as this really soothing, wonderful aspect of our lives that we can't quite get elsewhere. So in making the work that I was making there, I was thinking a lot about my own relationship and my own mythologies about animals. Growing up, my family always had these kind of stories about animals being almost representatives of people who you love who are no longer with us. So for example, my mother's parents, my grandparents, when they passed away, on the nightstand was a indoor plant, and on that plant there were 2 ladybugs sitting next to each other. And so for my childhood and adulthood, something that I would do with my families, everybody would give each other find things that had ladybugs on them, kind of as a representative of those people and them still being with us. And I find myself doing that with animals now. So feeling that these visitations from, select animals is kind of this communication with the beyond, or communication with people who I've lost or who are important to me. And so it's kind of this transmission from the other side through the natural world. And so I based this sculpture on the foxes in the neighborhood, and then I created the piece on the right-hand side in response to the exhibition I saw on St. Francis. And it's my version of sermon to the birds, except I think it's probably the birds giving the sermon. And I made them orioles as representative of Baltimore. And they were based on birds that I saw right before I left that were building a nest right outside my kitchen window. And so just as an aside, something else that I noticed throughout my time there were fragments of sculptures that were around Rome in different sites and museums. And I started to kind of collect these different threads of photos, photos of animals, photos of fragments, etc. And so fragments have been a part of my practice in the past. And just collecting these images of these really wonderful pieces helped influence some of the work that I made out while I was there. So I ended up making this foot that was based off of all of the different foot fragments that I saw, except made a little bit funky with some nail polish. And this ended up being my donated piece to Creta when I left. And then the piece on the left used the fragment as kind of a source of connection and touch from a disembodied source. And unfortunately, the piece on the left got absolutely smashed in my luggage on the way home. So just while I was there, something else that I started to notice were ceramic, large-scale ceramic sculptures that were in museums or mostly in museums. There are some in churches as well, but I was really struck by some of the ones that I saw that I'll show you images of. So this is the Lamentation over the Dead Christ by the workshop of Andrea della Robbia. And della Robbia was a really prolific Italian artist during the 1500s who used glazes, which actually made these sculptures able to weather the outdoors in a way that made them more akin to bronze sculpture. So it made them more applicable to use in public spaces, in churches with indoor-outdoor areas or monasteries. And so there's a lot of these sculptures around, and something I think is really interesting about them is the bright colored tin glazes in contrast with the naturalistic color of the clay used as the skin. And something else that I really found interesting about these objects in context just of the time is that a lot of times when we think of classical sculpture, we think of white marble, but in reality, a lot of those white marble sculptures were painted in polychrome in the time that they actually existed. And so part of the interest for me of seeing these was that it felt like a snippet of seeing what that might have looked like on marble in the time that they were existing in their modern day. And so just formally also the patterns and bright colors that existed in these sculptures just were really interesting to me and really a beautiful contrast. So I'm looking forward to incorporating them somehow into my practice. Okay, and then just kind of lastly, one of the last places that I went in my time in Rome was the Capuchin crypt, which the Capuchin religious sect of monks had separated themselves from the Franciscan monks to live even more simply than the Franciscans. Apparently it was not simply enough for them. And so they founded this other order of monks. And in this site in Rome, one of the monks, I'm not sure the year, had asked if he could arrange the remains to create these rooms in the crypts. And so they had given him permission, and this person with just this amazing sense of design and just some sense of morbid interest created these rooms in the crypt that are all of these monks arranged in these really ornate and beautiful, really grotesque ways. And so on the floor in like the second room is this sign. Actually, Kensuke Yamada, who is just at Clayworks giving a talk, mentioned this phrase. But in the second room, there's this plaque on the floor, and it just says, "What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be." And it is incredibly striking to be in a room with hundreds of real human remains and to read something like this is a really concrete reminder of how short life really is. I will say I didn't take any of these photos of the crypt. It is forbade to take photos inside of there out of respect for the dead. So these are all Google sourced images, which when I was in there, I had no temptation at all to take photos because it is a very eerie and strange place. It really left me with a profound feeling at the end of my trip. And so even though there were just a couple of days left in the residency, I ran back to the studio after going to the crypt and made this last piece, kind of a still life about the transience of life and thinking about memento mori. So remember, you must die. So with one of the skulls on the top, and then figs and pomegranates and snakes, and a lot of which are all symbols that I saw repeated in my time when I was there. And so when the residency at Creta came to an end, I really felt as though walking around to the shows that were everywhere around me, to all of the public art, to being proximal to be able to go and see other things, just had this really profound effect on my practice, and really gave me the chance to experiment with things, to have limitations in the studio, like to only be able to use ceramic finishes, all these things that just really felt like a breath of fresh air. And so it was a really, really amazing experience. And I'm so grateful to the Mary Nyburg Fund and to Clayworks for assisting me in being able to attend. And just before I wrap up, I also just want to promote one other grant that also helped fund me for this trip, which is the Maryland State Arts Council Professional Development Fund. If you live in the Maryland area and you do not know about this program, they offer a lot of different grants for community work, for experiences for artists like I did, to go somewhere and do something that feeds your practice. And they offer up to $2,000 worth of support with a rolling admission. So you can apply at any time, and they'll let you know within about 6 weeks whether or not they're willing to help you fund your idea. So it's a really great resource in our community if you're looking for some help to attend something. So yes, thank you again. Thanks for being here for this talk. Thank you to Clayworks so much for hosting me for this, and also for the help to attend Creator Room. I'm really happy to answer any questions anyone has about CREDA or otherwise.